know there's probably a lot of people with different levels of English here and from different parts of the world. So please let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow or anything else. And lastly, I want this to be kind of a more collaborative presentation. So I will be presenting a few things for the first portion of the presentation. But I also want this to be very interactive at the end and have you folks also kind of talk to me about your experiences and how this topic affects you um, and something that really motivates you. I try to choose a better background for you folks today. This is a little bit of nature for you folks. So if you get bored with me, and you can look at the beautiful nature behind me. But okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see this okay? Awesome, thanks, buddy. So as Flavia mentioned, this is talking about the impacts of female leadership and women in power in positions of power. But I want this to be a little bit, I want this presentation to be to talk more broadly about representation and what it means for different people who are marginalized to be part of the conversation, to have a seat at the table, to talk about serious issues that are affecting them. So before I get into the presentation itself, I would like to share in the chat a survey with you all. And please feel free if you don't feel comfortable or you don't want to do the presentation. There is no pressure, but I'm sharing it right now. Please take a look at it. It is in English and Spanish, but since this is an English presentation, I would really hope you answer in English. But if you don't, if you prefer to answer in Spanish, then I can certainly translate it for everybody. Please let me know if you have any problems accessing the site. I'll give you about okay. If you're not finishing, that's totally okay. Take as much time as you need. Work on it during the presentation. Um, uh, we're going to be going through the presentation, and I will have your answers at the end. And hopefully, if we have time, we can kind of demonstrate or exhibit the results. So without further ado. So, like I said before, the impacts of female leadership have very profound messages and ideas behind it. And kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about is, if I can figure it out, there we go. So some topics that we're going to be talking about on these slides is why is it important for different groups to be represented in positions of power, namely women, and what that broadly means to society and our cultures and our language. How do women in leadership positions affect countries in the world? So what are women doing around the world? What are specific examples of women making changes to affect the conversation in different areas? And as well as what countries are most represented by women? What countries have the most amount of women serving in their legislative bodies, in their most powerful government branches? And how can we increase the presence of women in leadership roles? How can men support women? How can men create a better environment for women to be leaders, as well as women supporting other women? And that's where I hope at the end that we can have a little bit more of a discussion. Being a man myself, it is I am biased, so I have preconceptions. I have ideas that I've had all of my life, and it's very important, especially in these types of topics, to have very open dialogues, and to not judge other people, but to help others understand, where we're at and where we're going, and hopefully create a productive conversation out of it, right? So more broadly speaking, what is representation? Why is it important? So in my opinion, I think representation is very characterized by diversity and inclusion. So diversity and inclusion are some buzzwords that we hear nowadays. But when I think of that, I don't think of just another word to include other people in the conversation, but also because it adds value to our lives and what we talk about. So we get new ideas and perceptions and perspectives. We create new approaches um, to solve problems that we wouldn't think of otherwise if we didn't include those people in the conversations. Um, one example of kind of diversity and inclusion that kind of predates modern civilization is just kind of like the prehistoric men and women that hunted and gathered to survive, people who lived off the land. And so the not many people know this, but the majority of people's sustenance or food came from gatherers. And so a lot of people think, oh, like people needed to go and hunt animals in order to survive. But it actually took other people to do other things, to have other roles in the community, in order for everybody to survive. And that created different perspectives, different ideas, different ways to diversify how we got food, and that ultimately leads to other topics as well. And I think more broadly, when people are represented, especially in leadership positions, it's not just about someone sitting in a seat. It's being recognized as a legitimate figure um, in in that leadership position. So if we're talking about a CEO in a corporation, and we see that as a woman, um, it gives other women the hope or the aspiration to also do that. And so it recognizes others as valid, and their perspectives as something that are really important. And I think it also normalizes behaviors and language that include other people. So the ability to um, recognize other people and have um, a representative of their community or their group, as well as people having the ability to, or rather learning about others and their walks of life and their backgrounds. And that ultimately helps us as a community to become stronger. And also, along with diversity and inclusion, we learn to adapt more as a community. When we involve other people in the conversation, we are able to help everyone, not just ourselves. So, I mean, there are countless areas and sectors that women have contributed to, and it would take forever for us to talk about every single thing that women have contributed to over the course of human history. But some things I want to focus on, I want to really bring it down to the specific level of who we are talking to, who are we talking about, and what significant changes have resulted from women taking leadership roles. And so some things that we're going to be looking at today is legislation, social issues, heads of state, the environment, and health. So the first is legislation. For those of you who haven't really studied American or US history all that much, it's been a very long history for Native Americans in terms of European powers coming to the United States and colonizing. And so it's been incredibly difficult, to say the least, for Native Americans here in this country, as all over the world. And to give you kind of a reference to how difficult that has been, in 2018, two Native American women by the names of Deborah Holland and Sharice Davids were first elected to the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is a governing body in the United States. And Native Americans have been here since the beginning. And when Europeans came over, they kind of established a new rule of law, overtook cultures and civilizations, and ultimately created their own governance, right? So to give you an idea, several hundred years have gone by where white men, eventually white women, and eventually people of color and of other nationalities were able to be represented by people of their own creeds or their own backgrounds in legislative bodies. And so in 2018, these two women were the first Native American women that were elected to these positions. And Deborah Holland was actually recently named Secretary of the Interior, head of the Secretary of Interior, which is a governing body that deals with natural resources, how we as a nation use our energy, forests, preservation, stuff like that. So it was a remarkable kind of pivoting moment for US history when these two were first elected, especially for the Native American community. In terms of social issues, I mean, there are a ton, but I wanted to focus in on a semi-recent kind of new, or it's, so time to go back a little bit. Back in 2012, I believe, a young Black man named Trayvon Martin was killed by a police officer, and the boy was not doing anything wrong, but he was ultimately shot and killed by the police officer, who was later acquitted on all charges. So he ultimately did not have to serve any jail time. He did not pay any fees, and ultimately this was a huge blow to the African American community. And so Black Lives Matter is a slogan that was created as a result. And it wasn't just in response to this killing, it's in response to hundreds of years of African Americans being repressed and being misrepresented and being killed and hurt by various systems. So these three women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, ultimately started the slogan Black Lives Matter, excuse me. And it was in response to this killing, but it wanted to increase the awareness for not just people in the community, but for everybody to recognize that Black lives do matter, and to show how African Americans are truly treated. And this ultimately became a battle cry against injustice. This is something that, if you go to a march in the United States, this is constantly cried out in the crowds. And so this is a significant slogan and movement that was created by these three women. And before I go on to Angela Merkel, you may have realized on some of these slides kind of contrasting pictures, and I'm sure you've picked up on the difference in the pictures. A lot of them, or all of them, have a stark difference, which is that all men are taking out of the pictures on the right side while leaving them in on the left. And this is to show kind of how many men are represented in leadership positions, while women still hold a very small share of the position of the leadership positions in the world. And so you might see a few more, and we can go back to a few photos if you'd like to see them. But just to give you some context as to some of these photos and why they're in there. And so focusing on Angela Merkel. So Angela Merkel, before she was the first woman chancellor, worked on the Kyoto Protocol negotiations, which was a monumental pivoting point for negotiations for climate change, and specifically the emissions of greenhouse gases. And so she was a lead negotiator for the country of Germany, and then later went on to become the first woman chancellor of Germany, and ultimately led Europe as the de facto leader. She pulled European economy up and pushed for more climate regulations, as well as a more ambitious Paris Agreement that looked to further decrease the amount of greenhouse gases emitted. And most recently has really led Europe and essentially the world in how to combat COVID. Many people don't know that she is also a doctorate in physics, which is super impressive. I mean, I had a lot of trouble back in high school with physics, but she is not only a leader of a country, but she also holds a doctorate. So that is extremely impressive, and has really led the world since then. And she is resigning this year. And so before we go on to the next slide, we're not going to go over all of this. This is a report pulled together by the UN. Sorry, I have to do a little bit of rearranging. So I will also post in the chat, if I can find it, if you have any interest in looking at this more. Sorry. So what I posted was a link to get to this, to explore it a little bit more, if you are interested in these kind of things. But generally, a general overview is that this kind of gives a representation of of how many women are serving as either not heads of state, but in positions of power in the government, more specifically women in parliament and women in ministerial positions. And something to note is that it's not listed on this map, but there are only two women serving as heads of state around the world. But countries to really note are Rwanda, Cuba, and the United Arab Emirates, which holds the largest percentage of women serving in legislative bodies. And here you can see portfolios held by women ministers. The most represented sector represented by women is currently the environment. So I invite you to kind of look around on this map and on these figures. It's extremely interesting, and you can see kind of which countries are really doing well in terms of giving women opportunities to be heads of state and women in power. Okay. So let's talk about the ramifications of what would happen if we did not support this transition. The biggest and most direct correlations between not having women in power is the harm that it does to women everywhere. Most notably in health. My brother works in epidemiology, and he has mentioned very many times that so women are underrepresented as scientists and decision makers in research. And that ultimately has a very harmful impact on women because if, for example, if you're a woman going into a field, it's much easier to talk with another woman about research. You're able to kind of relate to them more, and it's not as, sometimes men don't listen and they don't have the same understanding as it would be if a woman was asking questions, and it wouldn't be as relatable. And it ultimately, if we don't have women in positions of power, then we can't hear about, we don't allocate resources and give money to places that are underfunding women to go into better educational resources. So, and one of the biggest economic drivers that we could possibly do in the world is supporting women to come into the workforce. That's an extremely important, that would double the GDP of the world. And so but more generally, it sends a message of exclusion. So if we are not allowing women to be part of the conversation, as well as other communities, then we are sending a message of exclusion to people. And so some ways that we can support this transition, it depends on men and women. It's not just about women supporting other women. It's not just about men supporting women. It's about a communal effort to ultimately support this transition. So I think the first thing, the most important thing, is just to recognize women as leaders. In this kind of, we'll lead into the next slide, but it's kind of an integral change that we need to make to the system as a whole. And we also need to understand how systems directly impact women, and how they impact them negatively and positively. And if we have only men in leadership roles, then we are only listening to one side of the conversation. And we need to focus on the substance. When choosing leaders, we should be looking at women more, but we should also be focusing on the substance, not just choosing women just because they're women, but also listening and really having a really open dialogue about how to transform the system that we're currently in. And then recognizing sexist tendencies, the way that we talk, the way that we build policies, the way that we have dialogues about change. It's very easy to stay in our little bubble and talk and have the same conversations with the same people. But if we don't recognize the, the errors in the way we speak, in the way that we act, then nothing is going to be changed. And then lastly, we need to have our communities and our families really recognize women as leaders, but also raise girls from the get-go to be seen as leaders. We need to have them in more leadership roles. We need to have them uh, as part of the conversation as we have with boys. Because if we don't, these kinds of pictures are gonna stay the same. And I think it's really important that we change the course of history in order to involve more women in not just in government, but also in corporations and NGOs and in our communities. So very shortly, I mean, these are the conclusions, but I want this to be the jumping off point for people to kind of be part of the discussion. Because I think a lot of people have really good examples, and I haven't looked at the results of the surveys yet, but I'm sure a lot of people have shared a lot of really important ways that women have contributed to their communities. But in general, in my personal opinion, I think we need structural reform, not just, it's not going to be changed overnight. We need to have serious conversations that are going to have profound impacts. And this is going to be something that is not easy. It's not something that is going to happen very soon, but it needs to happen. We also, in my opinion, we need to allocate more resources to helping girls learn so that they are able to make choices for themselves in the future. And if they want to raise a family, that's fine. If they want to go on to work in profession in a career, that's fine. If they don't want to do either of those are fine. But I think giving girls the opportunity to learn and be educated is an extremely profound impact on their society. And obviously, we need to combat our sexist policies and language. That's something that is very difficult, and I think is a really interesting topic for this kind of conference that has so many different languages being part of being presented. There are so many different ways that we present ourselves, or we talk in different languages. So it is really important that we kind of tease out different nuances in each language and try to kind of combat things that we inadvertently say that actively harm people, that actively harm women. And I think we need to take a serious look at male-dominated fields. As I mentioned earlier, the impacts of women, if research isn't done in part by women, can be very dangerous. Men sometimes do not listen or are inattentive to women's needs, and they don't ask the correct questions. So we need that difference in perspective to have a better understanding of the needs of the people. So that concludes, the presentation part of it. But I also want to kind of reach out to all of you folks to talk. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to go ahead. Or if you just want to share something about your own experiences, about women leading in your communities, or so forth. So I really appreciate your time and listening. And I really appreciate the UAEH for having me on this format. This is an extremely cool format that you folks have going on. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you folks today. With that, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And well, you are invited to come up with your questions. Please, we know that you may have interesting comments or interesting questions to ask Peter. Could you please go ahead, teachers and students? I have a question, Peter. How was this transition of government with, Mr. Trump and now Mr. Biden? We think that it is amazing having Kamala Harris in this position of power, being a woman from, being a woman of color and being in this high position of power.
Absolutely.
Many of us believe that she can become the next president of the United States, someone like her or someone like Mrs. Michelle Obama. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a lack of women who are extremely qualified for the position. And history has shown that, women who have been running for the presidency have not been treated equally to men in terms of their questions, in terms of the way that they are talked to. But I think it's hopeful, especially with a lot of women like Kamala Harris, like Deborah Holland, all of these people getting elected, as well as being put in position of power to kind of head very important departments of the United States. So, and I know the United States isn't, the most exemplar, or sorry, that's Spanish. The the most, exemplified country in terms of representation of women. But I think it's slowly getting to the point where the majority, if not everybody, is willing to have a woman president. So I really hope that happens in the future.
Thank you. And well,
I have a question.
Please go
Absolutely.
on.
My question is, what could be the big difference in having a woman in power or having a man in power? What is special in having a woman in power? What is the big difference? Because
Yeah, I mean, I guess,
most of the times, men have been in power, not
Sure.
women. What could be the big difference?
I mean, I think it has there's a lot of different answers to that. I mean, I think the biggest one is that it allows other women to see that it is possible to be in the position of power. And I think that's an extremely profound impact on society. But also, I think more conversations are brought up as a result. I think men have been in power for a very long time. And so the same conversations are being held by the most important people in these countries. So it is extremely important to have women in power to change the conversation, to change the dialogue, as well as it being a more inclusive way of, of representing people in their community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Probably having more women in power, as you have mentioned, Peter, contributes to reduce the extent of violence in which women are treated all over the world.
Absolutely, that's a huge one. Um, and thank you for chiming in, Claudia. I think you know, being a male giving this presentation is a little bit weird because it's I think I have, you know, as I said in the beginning, I have biases, I have flaws. So, but I really do want to hear women in this conversation too, because I think I would love to hear their experiences and their thoughts about, you know, what, you know, having women leaders in their communities or being leaders themselves, what that means for them. So yeah, thank you, Claudia. And while you guys are thinking of different questions, I just wanted to share so a little bit about the survey that you all took at the beginning. Thank you for everybody who filled in the forms. So majority of us are you know, 16 to 25, and we have a little bit of representation from the older folks in the community. So I appreciate that as well. And so the second question was, how well represented are women, people of color, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, people in positions of power where you live? And the majority say 3. So it definitely seems like the perspective of the people that you know, that are living here are don't see the most aren't seeing the most representation in their communities. And I'll share some of the later examples. And I see we have a raised hand with Alicia.
Yes.
Hmm?
Well, my question is, do you consider important for the ideas of women or the woman or man?
Sorry,
Even
sorry,
the
Alicia.
gender.
I apologize. It cut out at the beginning. Could you repeat it?
Okay. Do you consider the respect is the most important for the ideas of the woman or man? Even the gender, it doesn't matter the gender.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
the ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, we are talking about women in this forum, but respect is definitely the most important thing, especially when talking to people with different ideas of how the world should be run or different perspectives on how things should be solved. Absolutely, I think respect is one of the most important things that we should take into consideration, for sure. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me stop sharing for a second.
I have another question.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, well, have you heard here in Mexico about women who are like showing a lot of ability, who have proved to be skillful running their states, like in Mexico City? Have you heard about Claudia Sheinbaum?
I have not. No. Could you enlighten us? Could you tell a little bit more about her?
Well, she's the woman who is running currently Mexico City. And
Oh, awesome.
well, yeah, and though I don't feel like really happy with the government that we have at present. I think that she's playing a good role, and that she has been carrying out her duties in the right way. It doesn't matter if it has to do with things that have to do with crime or things that have to do with health. She has been paying a lot of attention, and she has been involved in all the issues that have arisen in during her government period, and she has proved to be really qualified. So it is nice not only to see women outside Mexico like Angela Merkel or like Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris, which certainly shows us that they are really, really outstanding, but it is also nice to have women over here that are proving that in all the places in the world there are women who want to run the places where they live and who can do it really well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic point. Yeah, I think in my opinion too, like the women tend to be so qualified for these positions. And it's I mean, with the example of Angela Merkel, she holds a doctorate in physics and she's also a leader of a country. So I mean, there is nobody more qualified than somebody like that to lead. And unfortunately, I feel like that women need to kind of prove themselves more because of that, and because of the conversation that different countries have that kind of belittle women, even though they are so overqualified for these positions. And it's something that really needs to change in the way that we talk and the way that we choose our leaders, because we are certainly, I think, I can personally say in the United States that we do not always choose the most qualified people. There are people that deliberately do not pick women, and so I think that's one of the more profound topics that we need to address is picking more qualified people, whether they be men or women, and recognizing that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Peter. Please.
No, yeah, and I think I was just kind of looking at some of the responses. We got more responses in English than in Spanish, which I'm really proud of. But I was just reading some of them. Some people that mention leaders in their own communities mention neighbors who are women that organize and lead various situations to improve or repair the community, like parks or the environment. I think that's really important. And somebody mentions that the president of the municipality is also a woman, and also comes from their community, which is amazing. Yeah, so yeah, does anybody have any other questions for me before we end today? Or does anybody want to just share some personal examples of women being leaders? I think that's a little bit more a little bit better if somebody was able to share, be brave in speaking English for the presentation. If not, no worries. I know it's a little frightening up here.
In my case, can I say something?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In my case, I think that nowadays women are well prepared. In my case, I am surrounded by many intelligent women, well prepared. I think they are ready to lead the world. They are ready to lead communities. They are ready to lead states or countries. And that's my opinion.
Absolutely.
And I really admire women. And I can say, for example, I admire my wife a lot because she's a very nice woman, hardworking, intelligent, and nice. That's what I can say. Women
Awesome.
can do it. Yes.
Thank you so much.
That's all I can say. Okay.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Cool. Oscar mentions. Oh, sorry, someone.
Please, I was just going.
Okay. Why do you think that political positions are not usually held by women? Or why do they not have so much support when there is a candidacy? I think that's a pretty good, that's a really good question. And something that has a lot of different levels to it, right? So I personally think that a lot of women really try to hold these positions and really try to run for positions of power, but are usually stopped because of maybe societal pressures or unfair dialogues. Something that is usually brought up when a woman is running is usually like what they wear, or if they have kids or something like that. But the same questions don't normally get asked to a man. And so I think kind of going a step further, we need to really change in how we talk to presidential candidates or political candidates or people in the private sector or people working in NGOs. We need to be asking better questions and we need to be having more open dialogues. And it's really important to support those candidacies and positions that are trying to be filled by women. And I think that would make a huge change.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the lecture you have given to us today. It was really nice to have you with us. Many of us are really shy and sometimes we are shocked. And that is why this festival intends to provide this opportunity to all of us to be exposed to the language and to little by little gain confidence communicating our ideas in English. We hope you can join us in the next event next year. And thank you for your talk today.
No, thank you, Claudia, and thank you everybody for attending. I really appreciate it. I loved this format, and I definitely want to check out some of the other presentations as well. So thank you to everybody who put this together. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Claudia, again. And I hope we'll see each other in the next one. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Before we leave, well, I want you to know that lots of our students are sharing their gratitude because they think your presentation was really nice. So many of them are writing some messages to you. They appreciate your presence with us here today.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It was really fun. I hope that you all were able to learn something from me. If not, you enjoyed nature behind me if I was a little bit too boring, but I really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.